Okay. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Elias Muhanna. I'm the director of the Center for Middle East Studies here at Brown. I'm pleased to welcome you to this conversation with Vivian Salama, a veteran foreign correspondent and commentator who will be speaking with us this evening on a topic of especial relevance, the Trump White House and the press. If this is your first time attending a Middle East Studies event, welcome. Let me encourage you to sign up for our mailing list, which provides regular updates on our calendar. There's a QR code on a table as you come in, along with some copies of our annual report and some brochures. We will not spam you if you sign up for our newsletter. You'll get all kinds of helpful emails about our calendar this year, which is very, very busy. It includes art exhibitions, symposiums that are coming up, lectures by award-winning novelists, and lots of ways to connect with other community members interested in Middle Eastern cultures, languages, histories, and politics. Turning to this evening, after an opening conversation, there will be time for Q&A with the audience. In this light, I would like to point out that while this evening's event is not being live streamed, it is being recorded and may be posted online at a later date, assuming everybody behaves themselves. We are also photographing the event, so just please be aware of that. And finally, I'd like to thank our co-sponsor, the Center for Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. And now I'm delighted to introduce Vivian Salama, a distinguished journalist with 2 decades of experience reporting from 85 different countries while also covering US politics on the biggest stage. Since moving to Washington in 2016, Ms. Salama has covered the White House and national security for the Wall Street Journal, CNN, NBC News, and the Associated Press. During that time, she broke a number of major stories involving the Trump White House, including details on the president's first White House phone call with the Mexican president, of Bad Hombre's infamy, if we all remember that, details on the administration's controversial travel ban, and President Trump's interest in buying Greenland. She is currently a staff writer at The Atlantic magazine. Over the course of her career, Ms. Salama has called Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan, Israel and the Palestinian territories, and the United Arab Emirates home. She was Baghdad bureau chief for the Associated Press, covering the rise and fall of the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria, as well as Iran's growing influence across the region. Vivian is a fluent Arabic speaker. While the bulk of her overseas experience has been in the Middle East and South Asia, she has also reported in North Korea, the Balkans, and across East Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, and South America. She has a law degree from Georgetown University and a master's from Columbia University in Islamic politics and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Rutgers. She began her career working for television networks in New York City and Providence, Rhode Island. Please join me in welcoming Vivian Salama to Brown. Okay, well, I think we should start with a sort of a broad brush question, which is, I'm sure, on everybody's mind. What does it mean to cover a White House, as a reporter, to cover a White House that has made its battles with the media part of its signature style? We're all following the news of the FCC, the pressure on broadcasters. I just saw in the news on the way here that Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air this week. But there have been lawsuits against your former employer, the Wall Street Journal, for $15 or $10 billion. And the New York Times for $15 billion. Right. So if you could just kind of give us a sense of what it feels like to be in the business that you're in, covering a White House that is very much invested in its adversarial relationship with the press.
Sure. First, can you all hear me? Okay. I want to say it's so great to be here. As Elias mentioned in my intro, I lived in Providence for a little bit in the early years of my career, and for those of you who are local, you may remember I was in the courtroom when Buddy Cianci was sentenced to prison, got a mic in his face, and was front page on the Projo with my microphone in his face the next day. So it remains, even though I've traveled the world since then, it truly remains one of the most fascinating places I've ever covered, Rhode Island. and I could sit here and talk to you about it all night, honestly. So it's great to be back. Also, on a personal note, my nephew goes to school here, and I've been threatening him for 4 years that I'm going to come and embarrass him. And I finally got a chance now that he's a senior. I'm not going to point him out because he's turning red, but I'm glad to do that as well. So it's exciting to be here while he's here. As far as the question goes, it's an interesting time, definitely, to be a journalist anywhere. I transferred back from Baghdad after almost 13 years abroad. To DC in 2016, and I had just enrolled in law school, but I was also with the Associated Press. They transferred me, and I was originally supposed to just cover national security at large. And my boss pulled me in like October of 2016 and said, listen, we're having a change of thought. We think we're going to assign you to the White House. And I had no reaction. And she said, what's the matter? Why are you not reacting? I said, it sounds so boring. And she said, the thing is, you're going to law school at night. We think Hillary's going to win. So it's going to be so structured. The White House is such a structured job that you'll be able to go in the morning and then go to your classes at night. And I was like, I do need structure, I guess. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. It didn't work out that way at all, as you can imagine. I did go to law school at night while Donald Trump was elected into office, and I covered his White House for those 4 years, so it was juggling quite a bit. But it was the most extraordinary time to be a reporter in Washington and also a law student, ironically. And so I learned firsthand, and I kind of joke with people all the time, and they say, including some of the students I met earlier today, where they said, what was it like being in hostile environments overseas? And I said, do you not consider Washington a hostile environment? I mean, it legitimately, I think I got some good training coming into that environment, where we do have a president who takes a unique approach to dealing with the media in terms of the way he interacts with us, calling us fake news and liars and the opposition, and I could go on. And we have to take that every single day and still do our jobs and kind of keep our heads down and work hard and make sure that we're accurate and we're telling the truth as much as possible. And I'm sure a lot of people will question the truthfulness of reporting as they do, but we do take that very seriously. And so it's been an honor to do that, because I think we do important work, and I think it's essential work. It's not always easy. There are a lot of long days and long nights. We travel with the president all over the world, which is extraordinary. An extraordinary experience, but it's also a very tiring job. So, it's been pretty unique and pretty amazing. Obviously, there are challenges now in the country that we're facing, just in terms of, you mentioned the FCC and Jimmy Kimmel, regardless of the fact that his show's being reinstated, and he'll be back on the air tomorrow, we're obviously in this very unique and pivotal moment. We're certainly, in my lifetime, I have not experienced anything like this. And, we have to just continue to push the administration. I'm in a unique position that I can question the decision makers in Washington and kind of hold them to account. That's what we do. That's what journalism is. That's why we're called the Fourth Estate. And hope that we can do that in a way that still continues to preserve the very essential protections that we have here in the United States, thanks to the First Amendment. I have traveled all around the world, and I have seen countries that do not have those rights, and that journalists go to jail or worse. And so I take those things very seriously, and I'm grateful that here in the U.S., even if things are challenging right now, we still do have a better environment than a lot of other places, but I also don't want to take that for granted.
So Vivian, you are in I don't know if it's a unique position, but it's certainly a rare position of having covered the Trump 1 White House, and then covering his campaign, and then now in Trump 2. And so I'm curious to hear your reflections on what has changed as far as his relationship with the press goes. It seems certainly, Trump 1, we heard a lot about fake news, this phrase that became a household, became part of our lexicon. But it seems to me that, since then, certainly in the campaign and now definitely, that that adversarial relationship with the press has gotten to be much more specific and much more, it's not just that sort of blanket term that's thrown around. Do you have a read on that? Has it felt different to you?
Not really. I mean, the administration is completely different. Completely, like just in terms of the way that it functions. From 1 and 2, they're a lot more organized this time around. They're a lot more, their knowledge of how the mechanics of government work is a lot deeper. They're able to kind of use that to their benefit to further the president's goals. But as far as the way President Trump interacts with us, I have to caution you that what you see publicly is not always what we experience privately. And I'll give you an example. We'd be down in Mar-a-Lago, and the cameras will be on, and we'll all be in his face asking questions, and he'll be like, "You're fake news, you're the opposition, you're a liar, who are you with? You're a liar too, and I never liked your network," and da-da-da-da-da, and kind of goes on and on. The minute the cameras go off, he's like, "Are you guys okay? Do you want some wine? We'll send you some Trump wine. How's your mother? Is everything okay with you? You look great, by the way." And it's shtick, a lot of it. And so we know that, and we sort of take it with a grain of salt. Now, does it make it any less, less bad? That's bad English, but does it make it better that that he only says that stuff when the cameras are on, but behind the scenes he doesn't? No, because Vladimir Putin hears him saying that, and he goes around calling his, journalists fake news, except he locks them up. And you never see them again in some cases. And you see this in countries all over the world where they start to parrot that language because if the President of the United States can do it, so can we. And so there are risks to that. And I definitely, just because he's not doing that behind the scenes, it doesn't mean that it's any less, that it's less dangerous. I would say that, we can sustain it, we kind of withstand it because we know what he's like behind the scenes, and we kind of roll our eyes and just let him do his thing. And, we push back because we have to. I will caution, though, that there are differences between administrations, and I can sit here and say, no administration has kind of got the right, certainly not since I moved back to the country at the end of the Obama administration, and then Trump 1, Biden, and Trump 2 now. None of them have really got the formula right. And so, and then what I mean by that is that the Biden administration, and certainly the Obama administration before them, would talk about press freedom, and they would talk about the importance of the Fourth Estate and the way that we have to engage in media, and the First Amendment, is enshrined to protect free speech and journalists especially. But they were very restrictive with access. And this was something that frustrated the media. With Joe Biden now, we know more and more that there were other issues at hand. They were trying to protect him because they did not want the media to see his deterioration in a lot of ways, and so they were trying to shield him. That doesn't make it better, though. It is our job as journalists, and we to question the decision makers, first and foremost, the President of the United States, and we want access. President Trump wants us in the room all the time. It is like the drastic opposite of Joe Biden, President Biden. He wants us in the room all the time. But then he's going to call us fake news to our faces when the cameras are on and all that stuff. And so, neither of them is ideal. He gives us the access that we need and we want, but then he's also kind of throwing things in our face. And we would ideally like an administration that values the First Amendment and values free speech, values the role of journalists, but also gives us the access we want. It hasn't happened yet in my time in Washington, but, I just caution that no administration has got it quite right.
I'm struck by, I don't want to call it cavalier, but it's the response of a veteran, seasoned journalist who's kind of like, yeah, sure, he talks a tough game, but at the end, but we can handle it. Because when I think about the effect that these words have, even the performance of it, in other spaces that have traditionally been seen as areas of dissent for Trump, like specifically university campuses, we're always hearing about how the language coming out of the administration is creating a chilling effect in classrooms, on the quad. And I'm curious whether that's happening in newsrooms, even if he's performing. His administration behind him, as you say, is very organized. Do you sense that there is a difference in the way that reporters and editors are doing their job in the shadow of this administration that has, again, made their conflict with the press so prominent?
Certainly not. I mean, I wouldn't want to work for the media if we were changing the way we do things just because we're getting threats. I mean, we're going to get threats regardless. I mean, my colleagues who are old enough to have reported during the Nixon era could sit here and talk to you about harassment by the Nixon administration and others as well. You know, tension with the media, between the White House and the media, is not new. And so for us to buckle because this president happens to be using language that is very threatening in nature or, you know, very confrontational, we wouldn't be doing what we do. I mean, we come into this profession anticipating any range of risks, whether it's verbal attacks or, you know, physical attack or, you know, in cases of going to war zones, any kind of, you know, danger, physical danger. We can't buckle to that pressure. It would completely betray the people who we serve if we did that. Does it make it a more challenging environment? Sure, but that's just how we're used to operating, and that's not something that we're gonna, you know, back down because of. I will say that, you know, of course it's alarming, and what happens, you know, we talk about Jimmy Kimmel, it's not just a comedy show that was taken off the air for a few days, it's a question about an assault on the First Amendment and a politicized FCC, an agency that is supposed to be operating independently, because the President of the United States takes issue with a certain, you know, in this case, comedian, or a network is worried about harassment from the administration, and so they act accordingly. Of course, in the case of Jimmy Kimmel, you also hear that there are business interests at stake when you need federal regulators to approve big sales or, you know, big acquisitions and things like that, and you want to get on their good side so that they do so. I mean, it's a complicated environment right now, and unfortunately, you know, we see it in the case of universities or in the cases of law firms where, you know, it's happening in Washington and New York, you know, pretty rampantly. It is a time where a lot of organizations and a lot of industries are concerned that they will somehow, you know, be targeted by retribution, you know, through retribution by the administration, and so it's definitely alarming when you look at it in the macro sense of like all of these things happening at the same time. We as journalists are not, you know. We're not left out of that. We're not protected from that, and so we have to keep on doing what we're doing. But the minute we start to censor ourselves, self-censor in order to kind of stay on their good side, then we fail as journalists. And so far so good. I have not seen it, and I was until a month and a half ago. I was with the Wall Street Journal. The Trump administration is suing them for some of their coverage on the Epstein files, and they have doubled down and have gotten even more scoops since the lawsuit. So that's just an example of how we kind of hunker down and keep pushing.
I'm curious about the media itself. So we've been talking about Trump and how he has or has not changed how the media covers politics. So earlier today, Vivian was gracious enough to have lunch with a bunch of our students, and at some point over the course of the meal, one of us asked a question of the assembled students: how many of you, or how do you consume your news? How many of you like watch television? Right? Nobody watches television among students, right? Who are yeah. So we then talked about other sources of news, social media, podcasts, and so on. And there were a lot of nodding heads, right? A lot of students consuming news through social media, through the algorithm, right? So I'm curious about, you know, one of the things that we heard about the press pool in the Trump White House, and particularly Trump 2, was that a lot of traditional legacy media organizations were being denied passes or having trouble getting access. Meanwhile, there were a lot of like influencers and like social media celebrities who were being invited in. I'm curious about how that has changed the dynamic in the briefing room.
It's definitely different at the moment. I guess I was there the last time I was in the briefing room was 2 weeks ago, and yeah, you see these influencers. It used to be a much more traditional news group. I don't think it's a bad thing to mix things up, honestly. The media landscape is expanding, and I do think that it's important to reflect that expansion and bring people from all over. The problem comes when they try to only give access to those or prioritize or give special treatment to those organizations. That's problematic. And some of them are not really even news organizations or individuals who do podcasts and things like that. Like, if you want to rotate them in, just don't do that at the expense of news organizations that have enormous followings and things like that too. It's not ideal, and that's not even that is not the most problematic. Well, you have a situation now in the Pentagon as of today. The Pentagon announced that it was going to restrict access to all journalists in the Pentagon unless they signed a waiver to say that they're not going to seek information, classified or not classified, from any officials at the Pentagon, and then only then would they grant them access. Of course, all of us laughed at this, and we didn't. None of us signed it. So we don't have access to the Pentagon anymore as of today. That's not great. It's not great. It's not even just that it's not great. It's kind of heartbreaking. Like, we love roaming the halls of the Pentagon to talk to officials. It was one of those buildings that we had sort of free reign to walk the halls and be able to bump into General so-and-so, and you just ask him a question, or, and it's an extraordinary thing that we're allowed to do that. But also, again, just to be able to hold people to account, to be able to get information for the public. The more that they take these measures, the more it gets harder to do that. The Associated Press and Reuters, which usually have fixed places in the White House pool, were booted from the pool at the White House. And they have enormous followings, and they also provide news to, smaller newspapers around the world. All of this has an impact. Again, when you add it all up, it does have a tremendous impact and a long-term impact too. We'll still keep doing what we do. Fortunately, we have phone numbers of enough people that we can still probably get our information. But all of this is challenging, and it's not easy, and it's sad for a lot of us who kind of get our bread and butter from interacting with these people on a regular basis, and they like seeing us around too. Seeing the journalists in the State Department and at the Pentagon and at the White House, it's something that the officials really like, because they know that we all kind of keep each other in check. And so I think for a lot of them, they're feeling the remorse as well.
Okay, so this is a Middle East Studies event, so I do have to ask you a little bit about the Middle East. You have traveled extensively through the Middle East. You've worked as a foreign correspondent. But let's keep it close to Trump. What is the Trump doctrine? Is there a Trump doctrine? Is there what can we reconstruct about his views on foreign policy as they relate to the Middle East, specifically especially from those sort of off-camera exchanges? What's your sense of that?
If any of you know what the Trump foreign policy doctrine is, please see me after, because I would love to know. We're still trying to figure that out. So he campaigned largely on ending wars and sort of leading through example, giving power through strength, or leading through strength was sort of his slogan. I think I might have butchered it actually, but something along those lines. And he made it sound like basically our days of sort of having soldiers abroad or sending resources abroad for aid or otherwise were kind of coming to an end. And they followed through with a lot of that. Not necessarily the soldiers part, although they do want to minimize our footprint, shrink our footprint abroad militarily. But certainly our foreign aid has been pulled back dramatically. U.S. aid, of course, has been shuttered, as we know. And so they obviously are trying to shrink the foreign policy apparatus, certainly in our presence abroad, but in doing so, they've sort of focused on the diplomatic side of things, not the military side of things, which is ironic because he said he wanted to end the wars. That's one part of it. And so that part is significant. Today is the first day of the UN General Assembly. Trump will be giving a speech tomorrow, so that is going to be a really telling moment in terms of whether or not he can articulate some real path for his foreign policy. I think, kind of looking back at his first administration, now looking at the second, he was very big on, he still likes deals in both administrations. He talks a lot about deals. He talks about foreign policy in the way he talks about business deals. That's why he keeps on saying he's going to get a deal between Russia and Ukraine. And he sort of approached that one. I've been writing a lot about that since I returned to work. So I just actually returned also from maternity leave. So I'm trying to piece everything together in the last few months. But he was talking a lot about Ukraine and Russia as far as a deal. And he keeps on saying it was because I had this good relationship with Putin that we were going to get a deal within 24 hours of me being elected president. Just on Friday, he finally acknowledged for the first time that Putin, quote, let him down, and he was sort of lamenting over the fact that he wasn't able to get this deal overnight because apparently Russia is not so willing to give up its claims of Ukraine, and Ukraine doesn't want to just throw territory at Russia. And so he's sort of wrapping his head around this and saying, oh, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. Putin is not my friend. I thought he was my friend, but he's not my friend. And so that deal didn't work out so well. He thought he could get a deal with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. That was in his first administration. But the talks kind of blew up because he realized that Kim Jong-un was not going to kind of give him an inch on sanctions, and so he blew that up. And as far as the Middle East goes, I don't think there was any surprise that he was going to lean heavily into his relationship with Israel as a country, not with Netanyahu individually, because he was frustrated with Netanyahu coming into office. But he definitely wants to kind of propel Israel and bolster it as the Jewish state, perhaps at the expense of the people of Gaza. And so we're still kind of waiting to see. There are days where he seems like he's getting very disturbed by the images he sees in Gaza, but he's not yet willing to offer any full-throated support for the Palestinian people of Gaza. In his mind, I think he sees relocation as the only viable option for the people of Gaza. And this is problematic for reasons I don't need to tell all of you. You're all very intelligent. So, that's sort of his approach. And I think in the meantime, he's hoping that his relationships with the Gulf can help to balance things out. In other words, the way he has sort of turned to Europe and said, Ukraine should be your problem. America doesn't want to deal with that. He might kind of take that tact. He already is kind of taking that tact with the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris especially, saying, this conflict should be your problem. It's your region. But it's not so simple in the Middle East because he does feel like America has to stand very strongly with Israel and would not abandon it or kind of throw it to someone else. So that's a very long way of saying I don't think he has quite a doctrine, and I think he's coming to realize that, thousands of years of conflict and are not easy to solve overnight, or hundreds of years in the case of Russia and Ukraine. It's complicated. It's complicated.
In the past few weeks, we've seen some reports coming out of the Arab capitals. From Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, Qatar, from Doha as well, suggesting that if West Bank annexation happens as a kind of retaliation for the European recognition of a Palestinian state, which is something that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu himself have talked about, that would constitute a red line. And what they mean by that, presumably, is in the case of UAE, perhaps a kind of downgrading relations with Israel. In the case of Saudi Arabia, freezing the normalization process, the end of the Abraham Accords, which from President Trump's perspective, is it was a big glittering deal, right? From his first administration, it's the thing that's going to get him the Nobel Prize once it's complete, and so on. Do you sense that those states have that kind of pull with him, at least, that they could make that credible threat and have some kind of an influence on Gaza?
I'm going to turn the question back on you and ask, do you think they're genuine about those threats? I don't know.
Well, there's always a question that they have an eye on the street, they have an eye on public opinion.
Saudi especially, yeah.
Right? And that if we see a kind of mass forced displacement in the West Bank or an annexation resulting in de facto, apartheid, kind of a corporation of this population, and couple that with the real estate bonanza in Gaza, that it could create a kind of havoc throughout the region.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that he is hoping, not just him individually, but through people close to him, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who's not in the administration anymore, but is still very close to MBZ, MBS, the leaders of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and also his Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, who has also now become the Russia envoy, and I don't know what else. I think he's hoping that they could kind of get the Gulf countries into a sweet spot to basically come and not completely blow things up in terms of the relationships with Israel, come in and kind of take a negotiating tact and try to kind of be patient with things. But 2 years in, people are losing patience in the Middle East. Certainly, they've lost patience. And it's very hard to imagine, like you say, in answering the street, kind of listening to sentiments on the street in Saudi Arabia in particular, where you have different kind of income levels in Saudi Arabia that force the monarch there, the king, to listen to the street. It gets complicated, and it definitely, at least for a few years, has derailed the possibility of a Saudi-Israel normalization. I mean, nobody in Washington thinks that can happen, that it thinks realistically. I mean, they won't say, a lot of people won't say it on the record, but none of them think it's realistic anytime soon because the Saudis would get so much blowback right now in the region. So, I mean, it's so complicated. The Saudis and the Emiratis definitely don't want to also shoulder the burden of having to rebuild Gaza. And so getting them to kind of agree to something like that, or any kind of pan-Arab security force, which was the talk, the Biden administration had been trying to work with Arab nations to try to get them to agree to like a pan-Arab security force or peacekeeping force. None of them want to send their troops. Because then you have Arab troops trying to police an Arab strip that's been completely annihilated. Everyone has been trying to find a solution, and there haven't been any good solutions because at the end of the day, you're just seeing civilians being killed in, extraordinary numbers. So that's why Trump sort of just went with a new playbook and said, let's just rebuild this beautiful, Mediterranean front territory into a gorgeous Riviera. I mean, he sort of said it flippantly at first, but then he started to kind of entertain ideas for it. Have Palestinians have the option of leaving and coming back. I mean, all of it is problematic. The Arab countries know it. The Trump administration knows it. So that's why you don't see any kind of major announcements or any kind of real swift push because they just don't know how this ends. And keep in mind, Bibi Netanyahu is also kind of operating to the beat of his own drum. Don't kind of look at the situation and assume that Washington has that much control over what he does. Washington's very, very frustrated with him. And I always joke and say the one thing that the Biden administration and the Trump administration agree on is how frustrating it is to deal with Benjamin Netanyahu. I would hear it from both the current administration and the former administration about how much they'd be pulling their hair out dealing with him. And so that was something that kind of comes up a lot. Trump is very frustrated with Netanyahu. what we just saw with the Israel's strikes on Qatar was like a boiling point for that, where he was extremely angry at Israel for going and dropping bombs on Qatar without kind of consulting Washington first. And there's a bit of debate in the media about whether Washington was consulted, but apparently Trump was really upset about it. So we'll see where that relationship goes and how much that impacts. Again, I very explicitly kind of say that Trump is very devotedly standing with Israel, because I think that at the end of the day, Netanyahu or not, Trump is still going to kind of throw his support behind the people of Israel and the state of Israel, perhaps at the expense of the immediate neighbors, the Palestinians particularly. But he also knows that Bibi Netanyahu is a little bit of what he sees to be a loose cannon, and so he's cautious of that as well.
So before we go to questions, I wanted to ask you, we've been talking a lot about Trump, 1 and 2, but there was a period in there when he wasn't actually president, and you were a reporter. And so I want to ask you about the Biden administration. In the past few weeks, we've gotten a lot of sort of not leaks, but like statements coming out, people attached to the Biden's State Department who basically have said, we knew early on, within months, certainly by the spring of 2024, that Netanyahu's government was actively trying to prevent a kind of, was looking to prolong the war. And these were admissions from, the State Department, the representative, and I'm trying to remember, there were at least a couple of these kinds of statements that came out. So you traveled extensively with Secretary Blinken, presumably at that time as well. Yes. Can you give us a sense of what the mood was like at that time and how it manifested, that they were aware that this was happening, and why they felt so powerless to actually exert some pressure?
Yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary time. I was glued to Secretary Blinken for those few months in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, kind of shuttling all over the region. I was telling the students that we met with earlier today that there was one of the trips was 11 countries in 4 days or 5 days in the Middle East, just kind of ping-ponging around the region, trying to garner any kind of support, coalition, kind of, joint effort to exert pressure on Israel, but also kind of get the Palestinians to, exert pressure on Hamas. And it was clear very quickly that they were getting very frustrated with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that they did not feel that he was willing to listen to any kind of reason when it came to sparing civilians in Gaza, getting aid in at a reasonable rate, things like that. Those were some of the issues that they were really butting heads with him quite early on. I mean, this is within weeks of the attacks. And they wouldn't hide it from us, and we would report it. I mean, it's not like there was a secret. We would report their frustration pretty early on. But at the end of the day, no matter what the U.S. did, and they kind of kept on toying with how do we pressure Israel. They started to impose sanctions on settlers, and to kind of try to limit the settlements that were going into the West Bank, for example. Some of these more extremist groups who were targeting Palestinians in the West Bank. But none of it was all very symbolic. Everyone knew that there was one piece of leverage the U.S. had that would be a game changer, and that was the weapons. You cut off the weapons to Israel, and Israel does whatever you want it to do. And that's the case with countries all over. It's not exclusive to Israel, by the way, but I mean, in particular, in this case, for Israel, that would be that would kind of bring the government to its knees and make it listen to Washington. It was just never going to happen. Never. We would constantly question the officials about it. Why don't you do it? It's not an option. Israel is our ally. Israel was attacked. And so we will stand by Israel regardless of what happens. And we will continue to try to exert pressure on it to let in more aid and to pull back on these attacks on civilians. you started to have some subtle differences within the administration early on. I don't think there was anyone who was full-blown sort of, we can't do this anymore, stop it. Maybe staffers, but staffers didn't have the right to kind of pressure the President Biden. But at the end of the day, it always boiled down to the same thing. Every official I talked to would say the same thing. This is an issue for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not going to cut off Israel. He's not. He's a self-declared Zionist. He will support Israel through thick and thin. And a lot of them also felt like, in this case, Israel was the one who was attacked, and we have to stand by Israel. Hindsight is 20/20, and now a lot of these officials are coming out in retrospect, kind of talking about points where the policy should have changed or could have changed. I'm a little skeptical because it didn't matter what they thought. It mattered what President Biden thought. And he's expressed his frustration with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's expressed frustration and anger about the civilians, but not once has he said, we should have cut them off, or, we made a mistake giving them weapons. I don't think that's who he is, and that's constantly, even now, after the fact, his advisors constantly tell me at no time did he ponder that was the option. And if he didn't ponder, he's the president of the United States. So I don't know, it's interesting to hear from these other officials now, but I don't think it would have changed anything.
Okay, on that happy note, let's open her up to...
Always. Any Middle East discussion, right?
So we have a couple mics in the back of the room. Please feel free to ask a question.
Okay, so I actually have 3 questions. I don't know if you have time for them.
Tell me your name.
Oh, my name is Jim. I'm not a student here.
Okay.
I'm an interested...
You fooled me.
Interested
If we
resident,
could,
right, exactly.
if we could just
I know.
keep it to one question, just so we have time for
Okay.
everybody. Yeah.
So you worked for 7+ years at the Wall Street Journal, which is a somewhat right-leaning publication. You did some time at CNN, more centered. Now you're at The Atlantic, which is a little bit left-leaning. And I'm just curious, with your time at these different places, although you left the Wall Street Journal on your own volition and maternity leave and so forth, I'm curious as to whether you felt pressure from any of these organizations to take any particular stands in terms of the positions you took on your writings. If so, what it was. If not, why not? Because they're the ones paying the bill.
Never. I swear. Never. I was actually worried in a number of cases. I'm not going to name one. In any of these places, does politics seep in? The people at the top are, perceived to be right or perceived to be very left, and I like to be down the middle. And friends of mine who are already working for the publication said it's not like that with the news division. They stay out of it completely, and you're always like, we'll see. I swear to you, it's never happened. Never. Actually, there was one time at the Wall Street Journal, which it was like just an editing. It was my editor, who's like Joe at the next desk, not someone from corporate, changed a word in my lead that was actually a little left-leaning, and I was like, this sounds a little bit biased toward the, and he was like, oh, you're right, and we changed the word before it published. We changed the word, and it was very down the middle after that. It's my name on the articles, so I take that very seriously. It's my reputation at the end of the day, and I don't ever want anyone to think. And now, you just listed all these places I've worked and the different politics. So good luck to anyone who tries to guess my politics, because I've worked for all these different places. I try to stay as objective as possible. And if anyone gets in the way of that, I have a problem with it. So.
Hi, thanks for coming today. Really appreciate it.
What's your name?
My name's Amish. I'm
Hi.
a junior studying economics.
Great to see you.
And I really appreciate your comment on how you try to eliminate bias in your work. So I was wondering, at some of these organizations, or some of the most influential news organizations in the world, how do you go about as a reporter to eliminate bias in your reporting?
It takes time and training. I'm not gonna lie, it's not an easy thing. We were talking earlier today with the students about the fact that I went to law school, and in law, you have to take a side. You have to take a side when you're a lawyer. And that was a huge adjustment for me, just in academic exercises.
because I've been so trained to represent both sides equally, to try to reflect every argument. And then you go into law school and they're like, whose side are you on? Pick a side. It's like, I'm not trained for that. It takes time, and the good thing is if you have good editors who can kind of guide you and kind of call you out and oh, you talked to a Democrat, where's the Republican voice in this story? Or, things like that, You interviewed a government person in Baghdad, did you get a statement from ISIS? Literally, ISIS would put out statements, and Hezbollah and Hamas and all these guys. I mean, we would literally call them up sometimes, not ISIS, but the other ones, because they have political arms. We would call them up, and you represent their side of it if it's a story that involves them. Always call people and request comment. And I think the reason that I haven't had, honestly, the president could wake up tomorrow and on the wrong side of the bed and then decide that he hates me, but just like he does with a lot of journalists. But I try to be as fair with them as possible, and I think that they do recognize professionalism of our efforts, of a very deeply reported story, even if it's something they don't want out there, even if it's something they don't like. Did I call them and request for comment? If they gave me comment, I had a story that went on Friday, which was a little bit of a scoop on the Pentagon, incidentally. Did I contact them to request comment? Yes, I did. Did I include their comment in my story? Yes, I did. Did I call every agency that's mentioned and every individual mentioned in the story? Yes, I did. Did I give them enough time to be able to respond to me? I did. Did I represent every single possible angle in the story to cover it fairly and evenly and get all my facts straight? Yes, I did. So they had no problem with it. They were annoyed that the story went out, that somebody leaked it to me, but they did not fault me for that because they saw that it was an objective piece of reporting. And so that's what I tell students that I talk to all the time down, in DC is if it's airtight, if you can't poke holes in it, objective down the line, everyone's view is represented, you give everyone a fair shot at commenting, no one can take that down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. I'm super curious about your time in Baghdad, so I'm Nadia Ali. But actually my question is about this idea that at least, so journalists here are not imprisoned like in other places, or you said, or even worse. Okay, so I guess I'm wondering about this, because until a few years ago, I thought academics and students in this country, they are academic freedom and First Amendment rights protects us. Okay, so now we see that we are being targeted, and so I'm wondering at which point might you think that journalists might be targeted as well. And I'm also wondering, when I think about journalists in Turkey or in Egypt, who have been imprisoned, these are people who really, really went very critically against the government. And, I sometimes wonder, there is a little bit of criticism, but what is the line between, and, this might be a bit provocative, but I wonder, the emperor, are we speaking about his clothes, and at which point is it our role to say he's naked? And I guess, what I would like to push you a bit is the question of how do you sort of juggle the idea of wanting to have access and being critical and speaking truth to power?
I'd rather speak truth to power than, if you're gun to my head, you have to choose one or the other. I'd rather speak truth to power and not have that access, because I'll go around them. I'll find ways to get my information. We have computers in our hands at all times now. We find people to talk to. We don't have to get into the building necessarily. Obviously, you want to see things that are going on, but I don't have to be there every single day to be able to follow the, moment-to-moment activities of President Trump or President Biden or whoever's in office. I can watch it on TV, and I can call my sources,
to meet me outside of the office, outside of the White House, which generally they would rather do because most of them are not authorized to speak. So they want to meet you outside the White House anyway, if they really are going to speak to us. So that, obviously access is huge, but I'm never going to, take that at the expense of reporting truth to power. That is primarily what we do. We do accountability work, and that is so important. As far as you asked originally, when do I think it's going to change here, and like journalists or I hope never. I hope that we're never going to be penalized or targeted for our work, but obviously you see it in different ways. I mean, I was reporting in Washington on January 6th, 2020, when the Capitol. When the riots happened on the Capitol, and they were looking for certain networks. I mean, I was with CNN at that time. They were looking for CNN. I hadn't got there at the time. My colleague, Alex Markard, was there earlier than me, and he and his crew got beat up pretty badly because they were looking for the CNN journalists. So I was spared in that, luckily, but we are being targeted. I've gone to rallies where they start screaming fake news and they throw things at us. I mean, it's usually like, a thing of Diet Coke or something. Like they're throwing something, not harmful, but it's still like, it's not a pretty sight when you see that happening. Things are hostile, and there's definitely a lot of hostility toward the media. Just being on the campaign trail last year, I'd go into the crowds and I'd chat with people, because that's a big part. You're going to the rally. You're not just there to listen to the, President Trump's speech or President Biden's speech or Vice President Harris's speech. You're there to talk to the voters, to understand, what's on your mind, what's the priority for you. And in a lot of cases, and it wasn't just, by the way, at Trump rallies, it was also sometimes when we'd go to the Democratic rallies too, they'd be very wary of talking to journalists because they don't feel like they can trust us. I've been, it's not my first rodeo. I've been doing it for a while now, that I know how to butter them up and make them laugh and kind of get them comfortable with me, and I get them talking. And afterwards they're like, give us your email, let us know next time you're in town. And I'm like, okay, I've done my job. But also, like, to get them comfortable, to get them talking to you too, and sharing intimate details about, being able to, put food on the table and afford gas and afford childcare and things like that. I mean, you really want people to warm up to you. So, but people are angry with journalists. They're angry with the media, and I understand. I understand it. I'm never going to be like, try to talk someone out of it. I want to hear why they're angry with the media. Explain to me, where did we fail you? Help me understand, so that we as a profession can continue to, to earn your trust. And I never take that for granted, about, the fact that we need to work constantly to earn the public's trust. Because if you don't trust what I'm writing, then what's the point? I'm sticking my neck out there every day, sometimes in war zones, to bring information to people. And if you question me, then I'm not doing my job. So I don't know. It's all a very intricate sort of web that we try to navigate on a daily basis. I'm not sure. Did I answer your questions? Some of them.
I think if I took your question correctly, Nadia, I think, well, it seemed like it was a two-part thing. There was one, which is, we're living in a world where people are being deported and being imprisoned for writing things, and yes, some of those people are not non-citizens, but they're all here legally, and some of them are green card holders, and they're doing, and they are precisely doing the work of speaking the truth to power, or at least speaking their truth to power, and they are, and we've seen this over and over again. There's been all kinds of pressure campaigns. So I took your question to be about, like, you're in the business of publishing reported material, fact, public record, and do you not worry that we're already in that zone, that we're already in that phase where people are being, where the press is under threat? Tremendous threat.
I mean, yeah, we are for sure. Like I was saying, like the Jimmy Kimmel thing, I don't look at it in a vacuum. It's a part of a broader issue that we're facing for sure. You know, I think the only way we can combat that is to keep on doing what we do every single day and to keep on trying to win the public's trust. And that was sort of what I meant, is like, you know, if we stop doing that, then we essentially surrender to the pressure that we're under. I don't know what better way than that. You know, absent us like being thrown into jail at in mass, we're just going to keep on doing it. If it's for now, it's threats against us and our companies. You know, we just keep on doing what we're doing. Like I said, my colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, lawsuits, you know, threatening them, but they continued to churn out scoops about the Epstein files in the same way they were doing beforehand. That's all we can do for now.
All right. Question.
Hi, Vivian. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
I'm Marae. I'm
Hi,
a
Marae.
junior here studying neuroscience and music, which is very irrelevant to what we're talking about.
Neuroscience and music. Oh, that's a nice combo.
But I'm Middle Eastern, so I guess I kind of fit in. My question, so you presented a lot of information about what happens in these White House rooms, particularly with the president, what we see when the camera's on versus when the camera's off. I was really curious about the press's relationship with the press secretary in particular, because I think a lot of more jarring footage has come out in that room. So what has changed with regards to the press's relationship with the press secretary? Is that something that has changed since this administration has started? Is there anything special about this press secretary that has never been seen before, or is it, or does it speak to patterns in journalism that you've identified throughout your career?
Patterns in journalism. No patterns, which is the beauty of journalism, is that every single year and day is different. But it's important to remember that the press secretaries don't work for us; they work for the president, and so they are doing the president's bidding, and they're out there every single day spinning to make the president look good, to communicate his agenda, but also make the president look good. And so you take some of what happens in the briefing room with a grain of salt, because you know that is the MO. Obviously, when facts go out the window and there are anything from half-truths to lies that are being spoken, it becomes much more problematic because you are standing at the White House podium saying those things, and journalists being there in the briefing room, and kind of going full circle to why it's important for us to have access. We are there in real time to then hold them account when they say things. We can push back and say, well, that's not true. And that is getting harder for sure. I mean, the fact that access is being clamped down, the fact that, some journalists are not even allowed in the pool anymore, although they're allowed in the briefing room, so that's still intact. They've even kind of adhered to some of the old seating charts that we had with the White House Correspondents Association. So we thought that they were going to just put right-wing commentators in the first 2 rows and kick everyone out, but they actually haven't changed that. So we're there, and we're able to shout our questions and to kind of continue trying to hold them to account. Sometimes it gets very hostile, and that's not exclusive to the Trump administration. I mean, there were really hostile exchanges with the Biden press secretaries, and before them with the Obama. It's just that's the tradition of the briefing room. It's definitely challenging when it becomes super combative, as it has been. Caroline Levitt is a very, very skilled communicator in terms of the way she's able to articulate what she's trying to get out. A lot of it doesn't hold up, and so we sit there and we try to push back as much as we can. But again, she doesn't work for us. She's working for the president, and so it's just important to remember that she's out there speaking for him. He thinks she's doing a great job. She's 28, by the way. She's very young. And so, I mean, that's all I can say. She's not a colleague of ours. She couldn't be, obviously, because of the nature of the things she talks about. But yeah, it's not an easy relationship at times, and right now it tends to be. I don't want to say that it's hostile. Like a lot of what you see on camera, again, it's like what I was saying about President Trump. It's like a lot of what you see on camera is hostile, but then behind the scenes, you're able to kind of work together to try to get things done, to get information. And a lot of what happens on camera is a bit of a show. And so I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but, you know, a lot of these people do try to work with us behind the scenes and help us as much as they can behind the scenes. And so it's like, you know, we'll go and we'll fight with them on the camera and kind of try to hold account. And then behind the scenes, as long as they're cooperating with us to get information that we need, then we go with it.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Abby. I'm a first year here.
Hi.
I think studying international affairs. We'll see. And I just wanted to know, this may be kind of beating a dead horse, but as someone who was kind of covering Trump 1 and then the Biden administration and then kind of the turn back to Trump, I wanted to know, like, what was your kind of experience and perception of that shift back, whether it was in like the government level or just kind of the public sphere, and like how people in the country were thinking and talking and how media was working in that like shift back, and what was your experience?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind that we haven't talked about is, I mean, to talk about a shift. The impact on DC, the city, the District of Columbia, with Trump coming back into power this time around because of the number of federal employees that have been laid off and fired, has been extraordinary. I mean, the city was like going through a bit of a depression at one point in the early days of this administration because so many people lost their jobs. I was talking to, I mean, it's like so anecdotal, but like I was talking to a daycare near my house trying to think of where to send my kid. And it was like a Montessori. They usually have like a year wait list. And so I told them, I know you guys have a really steep wait list. And she goes, actually, so many people lost their jobs this year that we don't have a wait list. You know, that's what's happening in DC. So that's like, I mean, we have like real life impact in DC because we're right in the middle of things and so many people work for the federal government. So that's like an example. You always see a little bit of a cultural shift in DC when administrations come and go. You tend to have a little bit of a younger crowd come in when Democrats come in, although it's a little bit different this time with the Trump administration. I do think they've hired a lot more younger people, but it's the old kind of, you know, comparison is always like when there's a Republican administration, it tends to be an older crowd that comes in, and when there's Democratic administration, definitely during the Obama years, it was a very young crowd that came in to work for him. And so those are some of the like, you know, kind of simple shifts and changes that we see on a regular basis. And then, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, there are literally like building size banners of Trump's face now covering DC. I don't know if you guys have seen this on the news. A couple of the government agencies in DC now have these huge posters of Trump on the side of it, which is a very unusual thing to see in DC or the United States in general. And so that's also kind of, we've seen a cultural shift in that regard. You know, they're kind of making their mark on the city. You know, we have National Guard soldiers now marching around, heavily armed National Guard soldiers marching around the city, which we did not have before. I mean, I'm giving you like very DC street changes. You know, I almost don't recognize DC in the last 8 months. Like, it's changed so dramatically in terms of like the culture, the impact. Everyone is sort of reeling from the firings. The National Guard being, you know, rolled out on the streets, and then we federalized the DC police on top of it. It's a very strange change that we see soldiers, you know, armed soldiers walking around our city. And some people love it, by the way. Some people love it in DC. It's not like universally condemned, but it's just different. And so you ask the differences, like that's where my mind goes immediately, is just DC itself has changed so much over the last 8 months. The actual kind of changes between administrations, I mean, I kind of do my job regardless, and it's like Democrat, Republican, you're kind of just doing the same. I kind of go through the same routine over and over again, regardless of who I'm covering. So like, you know, obviously their policies are completely different night and day, but like, you know, covering them is a different, you know, like as far as the work I do, no. As far as the way we interact and the kind of tensions that we see now, yeah, it's different.
Hi, Vivian. How are you? Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your experiences
Sure.
with us.
What's your name?
My name's Leanne. I'm a
Nice to see you.
sophomore studying international affairs, and I want to ask you a little bit about your reporting and back in the Middle East.
Sure. Can you
As
speak up
someone-
just a little bit?
Okay,
Or
yes.
into the mic a little bit?
Yes, I want to ask you a little more about your reporting in the Middle East. As someone who is Middle Eastern and has lived there their whole life, I know how chaotic it can be. And I just want to know, like, how did you kind of navigate the confusion, the blurriness, or the unclearness of it all? I mean, all politics is confusing, probably very stressful, especially in the beginning of stages, like when a major change happens and you kind of don't know what to expect. How do you navigate kind of dealing with that? Because maybe that's just me, but I kind of imagine the Middle East as even more complicated. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I just want to hear a little more about like your journey, maybe any lessons that you've learned, and how that like affected your journalism, and then also maybe like your own like personal stances and stuff like that. Yeah.
My personal.
Like your personal
Stances.
stances and like how.
I'm never going to talk to you about my personal
Okay.
stances, so we're going to skip that one. It would tarnish my objectivity. No, I'm just joking, but I mean, I won't, but I'm just joking with you. I found the chaos to work in my favor. Certainly when I moved back to DC, it was actually an asset for me. White House correspondents before me, you know, were so used to kind of the strict, rigid schedule of the White House and the protocol and, you know, kind of the 9 to 5 of it. Not that it was always 9 to 5, it was ever 9 to 5, but like there was always like a very fixed schedule and you stuck to the schedule and things like that. And when Trump came in 2017, you know, he blew all that up and just kind of operated the way he wanted to, and we didn't really stick to his schedule. And I just found that to be totally normal. And my colleagues would be like, "This is not normal," and I'd be like, "Really? Oh, okay." So I felt like it almost helped me to thrive at the time. I just found it to be a very natural environment. You know, it took time when I moved overseas. I mean, I'm a native New Yorker. Like the Middle East was a shift in a lot of ways in terms, you know, I started in Cairo, which, you know, if you're not familiar, is a city of officially 20 million people. I'm sure unofficially it's like 30 million, where it's like just chaos every day. And it was my first kind of, it is the most overwhelming city of the Middle East, and yet that was my kind of entry point in the way that I became accustomed to things and got my Arabic kind of where it should be. Traveled the country with the former president/dictator who was overthrown during the Arab Spring. And I went from there, you know, I just sort of learned the ropes, learned how things operate sort of, you know, sideways and backwards sometimes, and, you know, how to stay safe, how to, you know, kind of learn to be skeptical of people in terms of like, you know, you can trust this person, but always question, you know, question people a little bit, you know, be skeptical. And I sort of moved from there and you know, ended up moving to Israel. I took a bus over the border. In those days, you could do that. I took a bus from Cairo to Jerusalem and sort of set up camp there. And then I moved from there to Ramallah a few months later. And I just sort of made my way. And a lot of it was because I was freelancing. So I was able to do that in a way that I could just kind of go where I wanted to go. I look back now and I think, what was I thinking? You know, a lot of what I did was probably very risky. I mean, I used to get dressed up in a full niqab. You all know it's the full face veil. And I used to go down to like southern Yemen, where Al-Qaeda used to roam freely. And I'd go and kind of embed myself and talk to people and try to get stories. And it wasn't always the most ideal situation. But once you learn how to navigate where you are, you know, protect yourself, keep someone you trust with you, especially if you're a woman, keep a male companion that you trust. You know, from my case, it was usually fixers and translators, like, you know, even though my Arabic was quite good, but the Arabic of the region, every single country has such different dialects that sometimes I needed an Arabic to Arabic translator. You know, learn how to operate in those environments, and it actually ended up being an asset for me when I got back here, so.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Don't do anything I did, though. I would not recommend it, honestly.
Hi, Vivian. Oh my God. Okay. I'm Alicia. I'm a sophomore studying CS. And I just wanted to ask about how, so you mentioned, obviously, as a journalist, it's your job to report objectively with facts and kind of balance both sides. But you're also, you're an individual. Of course, you work for The Atlantic or the Wall Street Journal, but you're also an individual with your own platform. People, know you by name. You are someone you're speaking for, you're speaking for the facts, but also you're speaking, with your own voice. So I'm wondering how you kind of balance, is there like a tension between having to report like objective facts and trying to balance both stories and also keeping in mind your own political beliefs? I know you said you're not going to talk about them, but just do you feel this tension? Does being a journalist mean that your political beliefs are inherently kind of shaped by the work you do and the things you hear on the job, or do you try to keep those as separate as possible? And do you feel this tension, and do your colleagues feel this tension as well?
Of course. Look, we're human beings at the end of the day. We're not dead inside, and everybody has their views and, their passions, and especially that we have so much access to so much information and ideas and policymakers. Like, we are, of course, shaped personally by a lot of that stuff. Again, I kind of defer to like the fact that I've trained for so long and it's taken me a long time. It wasn't like, oh, I came out of college and automatically I was writing very objectively. It took a long time to kind of get that. And I was grateful to the editors I had for so long. As far as like, certain things, like sometimes I feel like I'm writing the most objective story that's ever come out of my brain. And then I will get readers who will call me out on it and say that, accuse me of bias. Like, I have given up on making everyone happy because someone will find some word in my story and assume that it completely is a window into all my political beliefs. And sometimes it's just because the facts kind of lean toward one side or another. Writing about the conflict, kind of full circle to the Middle East again, like writing about the conflict right now in Gaza is, I'm never going to make anyone happy with what I write. And you sort of give up on that because you will, if you do not accept the fact or cannot accept the fact that in this war, what is the death toll today, the civilian death toll? It's coming up to 100,000. Is it over 100,000? Officially, let's say officially.
The estimates from a lot of human rights organizations is 3 times that, 4 times that,
right.
5 times that.
If a reader does not like that fact, then they're going to accuse me of being pro-Palestinian regardless. At that point, I'm not gonna sit there and get into a debate with a reader about it. Everyone feels very strongly about this conflict. There's no doubt, there's no question that Israel was attacked, that Hamas, committed this assault. But we are in a place now where a population has withered away because of bombardment. It was not a fair fight in terms of just the civilians that were caught in the middle. And so, of the against the Israeli military. You can say that in a factual way, and it will still upset a lot of people. And so, that's the hard part, is that, no matter how much you put in all the balance of it and say, there was an assault on Israel and there were hundreds of people that were killed and it was brutal and it was awful. And this was in response. And, a lot of people say, well, you have to qualify that Hamas started this whole entire thing. Well, Hamas started that attack, but the issues have been predated that. And I can tell you firsthand, as someone who went to Gaza in 2005, the situation was not great back then. So, it is a long conflict that has now come to a terrible, tragic boiling point, and both sides have felt it. But right now, you talk about the human death toll, the civilian death toll in Gaza, and it's a very hard thing to wrap your head around. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of people who don't like to hear that, or who really want, a clear, Hamas is responsible for this. And you're going to make people unhappy in that regard, even if you're just giving the facts. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you
Sort
so
of.
much. Yeah.
Hi, Vivian. My name is Jessie.
Hi.
I'm a junior studying applied math and computer science. So thank you for sharing your perspectives. I learned quite a lot about some new topic I've never studied before.
Great.
And my question is, to what extent does the administration see the press as kind of a vessel to influence public opinion, given that you've mentioned you always try to remain objective and let the truth show in your work? And how does that influence the comments they'll make to you versus to other news outlets?
Yeah.
And my last kind of question related to that is, how do you remain objective and kind of pluck out the truth from the comments they'll make to you?
I didn't hear that last part. What? Sorry?
How do you kind of pluck out the truth from the biased comments that they might make to you?
I mean, as far as them trying to influence, President Trump is actually quite brilliant at trying to control the message. It's something that he excels at. He likes to. I mean, it's why he wants us around all the time. Is that so he can speak and kind of own the media coverage, own the messaging. He is his own best messenger, and he's always felt that way. And this is something that we've talked about now for years. Press secretaries, staffers, he likes to be the one to communicate his agenda. And so one of the things that we learned from the Trump 1.0 administration is that, if we are to properly hold him to account, we can't just let him own the sweeping, coverage. I mean, it's different for us as a newspaper or a print news organization, but certainly, in broadcast, do you give him open air to kind of then talk about things left and right, and then he starts talking about things that are not true, saying things that are inaccurate, and you can't call him out in real time, you can't back check him in real time. The same is true in terms of print organizations where he was very, very active on Twitter on the first administration. Of course, we all know the history. They booted him, and then he was back, and then he opened his own Truth Social. But he is still active on Truth Social, but before that it was also Twitter, constantly putting things out. And sometimes it's kind of organized thoughts, and sometimes it's not so organized thoughts, where he would just be angry about something and say whatever. And in the beginning, we were all kind of programmed to be the President of the United States has made a statement, we have to cover it. But then you started having these things where it was Covfefe when he fell asleep on his phone, or and tweeted something random, or when he did a trade. I remember, I have this recollection of one early morning where I was still going through Secret Service security, and he tweeted something at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, oh shoot, I wasn't at my desk, and I'm sprinting down the North Lawn driveway trying to get to my computer because I have to cover it because I was still with the AP and we got to move fast. And then I sat at my desk and I was like, okay, I got to write whatever this is. And I hadn't even really looked at it yet, but I knew it was something about trade. And I sat down and I read it 4 times, and I was like, what? I don't understand this, And so we kind of sat there and we debated, and we were talking to my editors, and we were like, what do we do? Do we think he means this, or do we think he means that? And then I called the lower presses, the more junior press secretaries who come in earlier. They get in really, really, really early. And I walked over there and I'd be like, guys, what does he mean by this? And they'd all be like, they'd kind of shrug, and I'd be like, okay, whatever. And so I think we got better after a while when you had these incidents like that to just take a breath. We don't have to rush everything out. Let's A, figure out what he means, first of all, and then B, also try to figure out how is there a story here, or is it just some random statement because he's watching Fox News and he's randomly commenting on clips in real time. And so, there was that's something that we're kind of figuring out as we go. But again, to your point about like, how do you not let them influence? Like, we take control of the message. Like, we can take control of the coverage. And that was the important lesson that we took from all of that, is that we have to take control of the coverage, and not let him kind of have this sweeping time to just control the coverage himself. Your second question about biases?
It was about how.
Oh, plucking out the truth from biased statements?
Yeah.
Plucking out the truth from biased statements? Like what that the president says?
Yeah, if it's, I mean, you can completely just fact check it if it's blatantly wrong, but if they make a comment that you know is trying to get across a certain message, would you just like say that they said this?
Yeah.
Or like, how would you interpret
I've
that?
got a great example for you. During the debate last year, when he said that, when he echoed the conspiracy theory that Haitians were eating the dogs and cats in Ohio. Where was it? What was the town? Middletown, Ohio. He said that he actually repeated a conspiracy theory that had been circulating that said that the Haitian migrants were eating dogs and cats like house pets. And because of the fact that we had a local lawmaker who had made a comment that basically disavowed that and said it wasn't true. I was still with the Wall Street Journal. It was last year during the campaign. And so we put in the statement, because I remember I was covering that debate. We put in the statement of the local lawmaker, said like a local lawmaker from that town, or the mayor of the town, I think it was, said that was not true. And then we sent a team of reporters there to go and investigate. And they wrote the most extraordinary piece that ended up going viral because it was so incredible, where they basically did this investigative report to figure out if dogs and cats, house pets, were being eaten. And it all started with a woman in Middletown. I hope I'm getting the town right. I think it was Middletown. Springfield, thank you. Springfield, Ohio. So this woman in Springfield who basically was the source of it because her cat was gone and she was convinced that a Haitian migrant on her street had eaten her cat. And then, word got around, and then J.D. Vance had tweeted it out. And so he was confronted in the debate about J.D. Vance's retweet. And he's like, well, there are Haitians eating dogs and cats in Springfield. And that was how it all came about. My colleagues went and interviewed that woman who was like the original like ground zero of this like dog and cat eating fiasco, who said that 2 days after she reported that to the authorities, her cat turned up in the basement. And so it was this whole thing. And so like that's how if you can't do it in real time, do it after, still commit to it. Don't just let it linger, especially in a debate like that where it was a live thing. There was no fact checking in real time, although they did push back, I think, on that one claim, and Trump got really angry about that. I mean, that was a whole another story about the fact checking during the debates, but I'll leave it at that.
Maybe we should end on that. Victory for journalism,
Thank you so
debunking
much.
the Catgate. Thank you all for coming. Let's have a round of applause for Vivian. Thank you.